Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Rewrite Success, Reclaim Your Purpose, Rebuild Our Future for Purpose-Driven Founders. My name is Colin Mahan, the Director of High Growth Impact Entrepreneurs and Head of Sponsorships here at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know the center, we're a nonprofit dedicated to expanding access to the knowledge, networks, and mentorship entrepreneurs need to build and scale companies. Today's session is designed specifically for founders building companies with significant growth ambitions. Whether you're raising capital, scaling your go-to-market strategy, or preparing your company for long-term scale and exit opportunities, this is for you. Many of you are operating in environments where speed, scale, and capital efficiency matter, and where decisions are shaped by investor expectations and rapid growth. This programming is intentionally built for founders navigating that key kind of trajectory. Before we dive in, we're going to launch a few couple of polls. First poll, how are you feeling about your business? Are you optimistic? Are you feeling a little survival mode? We use all of this feedback to help guide the programs and resources we build for this global community of founders. Now, while you're answering these polls, feel free to drop in the chat where you're dialing in from today. It's always nice to see the range of places founders are dialing in from. Maybe you'll have a neighbor. We'll also have live Q&A for a speaker near the end of this talk, so feel free to submit those questions for us at any time throughout our discussion in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, while these polls are running, I'd like to briefly recognize the partners who make this work possible. The programs we provide at the Nasdaq Center are supported by organizations including Nasdaq, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asian Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the Nareed Foundation, KKR, and BPM. Their support helps us expand access and knowledge for entrepreneurs around the world, and we're grateful for their partnership. All right, let's see as we're running this last poll where people are coming in from today. Quincy, Bay Area, Silver Springs, Maryland, Redwood City, nice, San Jose, Orange County, Texas. Love it. A lot of different time zones here. Welcome, everybody. Greensboro, North Carolina. Love it. Round Lake. Welcome, welcome. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm dialing in from San Francisco. Let's see what this last poll has to say. Looks like finance is in the lead, but looks like we have a good mix of sales and the rest. So thanks for voting. We'll take those into account as we build the next couple months of programming. So without any further delay, please join me in giving him a warm welcome back to the Nasdaq Center stage. Arun Gupta is a venture capitalist, Stanford University lecturer, and CEO at the Noble Reach Foundation. He's also the author of the book we're going to be talking about, which is hot off the press. So I think it's been out for 11 days, The Mission Generation. Arun, welcome.
Colin, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you back also to dive into this awesome topic. Before we dive into some of the questions I have for you around the book, can you talk a little bit about your background and also the genesis of the Mission Generation?
Sure. The lens that I come at this from is my own lived experience. My father was in public service 40 years, so he was in the Navy. My professional career was in venture capital and Carlisle and Columbia Capital. Second half of that time was really at the intersection of mission tech and entrepreneurship. Investing at the cross section of that, and you saw the power when you can get the innovative ecosystem of entrepreneurship to marry with government, but you also saw the challenges to solve big problems. I then was teaching at Georgetown and was teaching at Stanford as well, a class called Valley Meets Mission. How do you take the entrepreneurial spirit of the Valley and tie it, not waste it on Candy Crush 3.0? Like, how do we get this top talent to think about solving mission-driven problems, but doing it in a for-profit way? And that led to the first book, which I had the benefit of coming in chatting about with you, called Venture Meets Mission. Since then, we've launched a foundation called Noble Reach, a foundation where we have a $500 million endowment now, trying to place top tech talent into government, which is one of the things we talk about, like how do we get our top tech talent going in? Less than 7% of tech workers are under the age of 30 right now in government, and we need to, fix that. And we can talk more about that. And as we were launching these programs, I think one of the questions we would ask when people would hear that data is like, how are you going to inspire this next generation? And what we were seeing on the ground was the opposite. Like the generation was ready to be already energized to be inspired. They were more mission driven than I think people give them credit for. And that was the story we wanted to start telling. And so it was not intending to write a book, but then with the overwhelming amount of enthusiasm that we would see. And then, that it wasn't limited to just the younger generation. We would talk to mid-career folks and late career folks. And you could see many of the same questions being asked. They were just manifesting themselves differently based on your career stage. And so we talk about the mission generation as not about age, but about agency. That it's a collection, a group of folks that really want to not accept the fact that personal ambition and civic responsibility have to be a choice, but they can be integrated. And that they're looking to build their careers at this intersection of combining personal ambition with civic responsibility. And I think our academic institutions still silo those. The pathways that we have, still silo those. But we think of the mission generation as the builders that are looking to break down those silos and, build going forward. Especially with all the change that we're seeing right now in real time. And as we move into a world of AI and are challenging the fact that the scripts that we were given in a more stable environment and world really don't apply in the same way as we move into this new world, which is going to be ever changing and potentially accelerating as far as change goes.
I love it. And speaking of new world, your book challenges the traditional definition of success. So, what shifts are driving more founders and professionals to rethink success through the lens of contribution and impact?
Yeah, at the core of it, in what I was saying earlier, Colin, is, I think a shift that's taking place of putting purpose and the problems that you care about at the center of that. And why is that would be the question, and why now? Again, I think this generation and where we are today, from even just 5 years ago, we've gone through a lot. We're post-COVID. We've seen geopolitical conflict like we haven't seen in decades. We've seen environmental conflict increase. Great power competition is here again after decades of being subdued. And then AI is creating a lot of uncertainty. And so when things are stable, I think it's easy to focus on yourself. When things get rocky and the sand starts shifting underneath you, you reach out to others for support. And I think that's the world we're in. Like people want to be part of something bigger than. And so that's what drives, I think, a lot of the interest and introspection around purpose. I think in addition to that, though, we're seeing the breakdown of traditional career pathways that were built around a more stable time. Where my dad had one job for 40 years. I had a career, multiple employers, but I stayed in my lane. Going forward, we say people are going to have 4 to 6 careers, and likely over 60 years, just because people are going to be living longer. We're about to hit a revolution now with AI and life sciences and longevity that will, I think will create, not only greater lifespan, health span, but also work span. And so that changes things. And so, when you look at, the markers that we've had to date in a world where you have 40-year careers, we've had a contract with the institution where we've kind of outsourced meaning to the institution. And said, look, we have a contract. I know I'm going to be with you. You're going to be, and like you tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And, it works. In a world where that contract no longer exists, the agency of what that meaning of purpose is shifts to the individual, which can be unsettling, but I think it can also be empowering if we get to the other side of it. And that's where we are. I think a lot of the job pathways we have today are built on the institution that we're part of or the job title that we have. And those are prestige markers. That's how we've created our systems. And, those are also the ones that are getting disrupted real time. When you look at, creating pathways around the problems that you care about, right? The why you're doing what you're doing. That becomes your stabilizing force. Because in a world that's going to be changing rapidly, you're gonna, the job itself or the institution itself may get disrupted, but the purpose will have to be will be the only thing that's stabilizing that helps you navigate that, and that's what we refer to. And so I think that's, those dynamics are really getting people to really think hard about like, what is it that I care about, right? And so that's why, I actually think this generation is more mission driven, not less, than previous generations. I think they
Yeah.
want to serve. I think they have this sense of like wanting to solve problems. They're looking to kind of create their identity around the problems that they're working on, not the institution or the job title that they're with. But that requires a different scaffolding, one that we don't really have today, because the scaffolding we have is still around a career. And that starts at the academic institutions, which talk to students as if they're preparing them for a career. But the truth is they're not. And they're going to have 4 to 6 careers. And so we need to think about everything from the language we use to the on and off ramps that enable people to be moving across sectors. And in a world of AI, one would argue as well that that fluency becomes your differentiator, the fluency to be able to go across sectors. Primarily because I think AI goes after IQ over EQ. So it'll go deep really quickly. It can codify things, but it's that cross fluency then becomes your kind of the human judgment and, based on unique experiences. It's a additional perspective that one can add to any problem.
Yeah, I heard a mentor say, AI is like the smartest intern that you've ever had that has no common sense.
I like that. Yeah, there's
Um,
that.
so I really love that you were talking about, purpose and why your why matters. And I'm sure as a venture capitalist, you asked, why do you care about this problem you're solving? A bunch of times. But how can entrepreneurs intentionally invest across all 6 forms of capital while still managing the realities of like actually building and scaling the business?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Colin. And for the audience, it's probably helpful to lay out what we talk about with the capitals and why we talk about it this way. So there's some context. So back to the idea that we need to create more of the language to support careers of 4 to 6 careers over time. Part of the language is also how we define success, right? And so if you think of wealth as what you accrue and net worth is what you bring to the table, if we go around, I was speaking at a conference yesterday and I said, if we go around the table and ask everyone to write down their net worth, it'll be probably a number that is some proxy for your savings account, investment portfolio, and real estate assets. And we all know that, while that's an important piece of the net worth equation, it's not the only one, especially those of us that have the benefit of looking back on our entire careers. And so we need a language that helps young folks to think about like what are other places you should be investing in. And we intentionally use the word capitals because we want it to be viewed like an investment. That the more you can do early and consistently, the greater it will compound over time, right? So what are those? So we talk about experiential capital, alluding to what we just talked about earlier, Colin. In a world where AI can go after IQ over EQ, what becomes even more unique than in human is the unique experiences that you come at this with, right? It's no longer about like, oh, I can develop a really great financial model because AI can do that really well too. What becomes more interesting is that like I can look at that model with a lens that's a more diverse lens based on experiences that I've had. And so I think we will benefit from, folks that have more diverse experiences, whether it be traveling or being overseas or being at a startup or being, in different sectors. Like those things give you a unique lens of judgment that you can add to the veneer of the data that's there. Along with experiential capital, there's trust capital. In a world of AI, especially I think relationships and trust will be even more important. Like, who do you trust? Not just the data, not just what the AI is telling you, but like, how do I verify this in some capacity and triangulate around this and diligences. And those relationships are even more meaningful and compound over time. I look back on the relationships I was able to develop 30 years ago. Those have compounded in a way that are allowing me to do things that I would never have thought I would be able to do. And we need to think about trust that way. Learning capital, not in terms of skills, but in terms of curiosity. When we think of learning in a world of AI, our education system is about how do you get to the right answer. In a world of AI, it's about how do you ask the right questions, right? That's a very different way of looking at things. And so I think at the core of asking questions is curiosity. If you don't have any curiosity, then it's going to, you're just going to fall into the trap of like whatever the AI tells me, I just take it for granted. And to your comment before, that's just like a really, really smart summer intern. If you have curiosity, you'll poke and you'll prod and you'll ideate, and it'll take you to places that you would have been maybe hard to just go on your own. And it becomes an enhancer in that capacity. Along with that, we talk about mission capital, like impact you have, because I do think impact speaks to purpose. And people need to feel a level of impact to sustain themselves, when they hit those rocky periods, when you hit those air pockets and you're like, oh, right, is this worth it or not? But, if you feel like you're having impact and there's purpose aligned to it, it helps you push through it. And the final one is health capital. And I only put it final, not because it's least important, but because at the end of the day, it sustains all your other capitals, right? And in a world, especially where you think people might be working 60 years, we need to, be thinking about our health. And I don't just mean physical health, it's emotional and mental as well, and how we balance that. And so these, what we talk about in the book is these comprise what we call the compass capitals, which help you navigate this ever-changing environment that we're going into. But they also self-reinforce each other. They're not orthogonal. You're not making trade-offs, right? So a lot of this is about creating coherence and alignment. And if you can do that well, this becomes your differentiator, is the way we view it, especially as an entrepreneur.
That's a great list. I love that it doesn't include cash because that one's always top of mind for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Um, so speaking of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders struggle to balance their ambitions with their purpose, especially like in these high growth environments where pressure for speed and returns can dominate decision making. So how can entrepreneurs think about pursuing meaningful impact without losing their momentum and competitiveness?
Yeah, to me, this is all about alignment, right? It's about creating early alignment between ambition and impact. It can't be an afterthought. So where you're like, hey, let me go, we've got this path to go down. And then on the weekends, maybe we'll do a charitable thing to make ourselves feel good. Like that's not what we're talking about, right? This is something that's much more integrated into your business, in your business model. And it ripples through, especially your organization. Because again, back to the points, and every entrepreneur is going to see this, whether they're successful or whether they're going through twists and turns, is that you're going to hit air pockets, you're going to hit curveballs. And it is having that purpose in place that helps the organization push through it as well, because they see that they're trying to solve a bigger problem. And without it, speed is important. Don't get me wrong. This isn't about slowing down, but it is also about not necessarily being the fastest one to some place is the way to go, because you may be going to the wrong place, and you may get there quicker. You want to make sure that the most competitive companies, I think, are going to be those that have spent the time aligning their purpose with that speed, and are testing and learning and experimenting very quickly. And so I think that's what we're really talking about in the book. Mission shouldn't be a constraint, and that's why I also, with this generation, strongly believe when people say like, oh, this generation doesn't want to work hard. I'm like, no, 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 that's not true. They don't want to work hard if they don't see there's any impact or it feels purposeful. That's the caveat. I think if they can feel a level of purpose or a level of impact, they'll work much harder than previous generations. They'll work long hours, and I see it. So I think that's where the alignment becomes incredibly important in what we're talking about.
Totally. And speaking of alignment, we work with a lot of health tech, ed tech founders making impact globally, all over in rural regions, all the way to the United States. And they always say, I struggle with, especially pitching investors, but I struggle with communicating my impact versus communicating my financials. So, any advice there?
I mean, look, I think again, it needs to be integrated. Because I don't think you should be communicating them independently. It should be about how one flows into the other. The impact you're having should flow into your financial. If you can't see that, then you haven't built the business model in a way that is coherent and aligned. And I think the folks that struggle with that, is really the core underlying issue is that there's not alignment.
Yeah, you need revenue coming in to be a business that is. In the book, you describe today's economies as moving from independence towards interdependence. So, what does that shift mean for how founders should think about leadership, partnerships, building resilient companies?
Yeah, so this one, we probably talk about it much more at a national and societal level, but it does flow down to the organizational and entrepreneurial level. And the way we talk about it in the book is, 250 years ago, as we are here now at our 250th celebration of the country, our founding fathers created a system of independence. And that system has been phenomenally successful in helping build the country to where we are today. Um, and what we put out in the book is that the opportunity and the challenge for the mission generation is to take that and build a system of interdependence. Because if we are going to get the best out of our society, we need to be able to create the scaffolding that I was referring to earlier that allows our best and brightest to have these crosswalks. We don't just send people into the academic industry, academia for 30 years, and then public sector for 30 years, and industry for 30 years, and not for profit for 30 years, right? Like we need to be able to create crosswalks that make it more both natural, appealing, and normal, so that our best and brightest are doing that. I think the same is true when we think about this for entrepreneurs. On the one hand, any great entrepreneur hopefully knows that they're only as good as the team they put around them. So implicitly, even at the inside the organization level, it starts with creating a level of interdependence with your team, and hopefully hiring people better than you, because the stronger your team is, the more likely you'll be aligned for success. Um, Outside the organization, that interdependence leads to, how we build networks of trust, with partners, with customers, um, with vendors, in supply chains. And that's incredibly important. And, we've seen it when it's because of the, existential shocks that some of our systems have taken, whether they be because of geopolitical or because of the pandemic, the companies that, were able to maintain trust, with their employees, with their partners, with their customers, were able to navigate times of crisis. Because you don't build trust at the time of crisis. You have to build it ahead of time, and you use that, trust capital, as we would call it, at the time of crisis. And this is why it's important to be, aggregating this, that earlier. And so it's incredibly important, and I think Francis Fukuyama writes at a societal level, but I think it's true with companies too, like societies that, have more trust in the society, um, there's less friction, uh,
Hmm.
of commerce even. And societies that have more trust, it's almost like, or less trust, it's almost like a tax placed on it. Every transaction's got a little bit more that has to get done before we know we're going to do it because the level of trust isn't there. And so I think that's how we think about interdependence, because at the core of interdependence is it's hard to have that if you don't have trust,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that becomes an important part in what we're talking about. And I think, look, when I teach, my classes, I say, trust is your currency as an entrepreneur, right? It is the currency. I get cash is important. But if you don't have trust, you're not going to have cash. That's all I can say, right? Like if you don't have trust, there's no one that's coming to finance you. There's no one that wants to buy your product. You'll be lucky if people want to work for you, and or partner with you. And so I think it all starts there. And that, I think that's the core central theme for interdependence as well.
Yeah, humans do business with humans. What do you know? Um, so in the book, you talk a little bit about some of the common forms of resistance you see entrepreneurs facing today. So how can they move beyond them in this mission generation?
Yeah, so the four resistances that we talk about as we think about the mission generation, you know, it's inside working out. So on the inside, we call it internal resistance, kind of what's in your head. Can I do this? Imposter syndrome, perfectionism, those kinds of questions. The second is relational resistance, friends and family, coming from a good place, mind you, but asking you when you say you're going to do something entrepreneurial, going, are you sure, Colin, you want to do that? It sounds risky. That can be paralyzing. Like, when your closest and, dearest friends are kind of questioning the decisions you're making. The third is societal. Um, will it matter to folks? Will it feel prestigious? Will it feel like I'm doing something meaningful? The prestige markers that we put out there. And that's why the language we use around success becomes really important. And then fourth and finally, institutional. Many times you just get locked in. I've been in this sector for so long, I don't want to leave now because I don't want to start over. And especially if you're in like the academic or public service sectors where it's harder to kind of just jump and leave. And so I think those resistances all play a role. And I think the way we talk about it with the mission generation in a lot of these things, and we get into the mission flywheel, is that much of this starts with not just pondering what your purpose is, but acting and running experiments to get signals on what that may be. And the reason we say that, Colin, is that in a world that's changing really rapidly, if you just sit there and go like, all right, let me think about what I care about before I go do something, um, you're just always going to be thinking about it because by the time you come up with what it is, the conditions that you came up with it with have changed, and now you're going to reassess based on those new conditions, and then you find yourself in this ever-ending loop. Uh,
Hmm.
Instead, what we're saying is start acting, start doing some things, start running it like an experiment, have a hypothesis. It's almost more of the scientific framework, and test the hypothesis. And if you get the right signals from it, um, then double down on that hypothesis, but also then recruit allies around you that will help you, with that. People that are going to say, "Hey, that sounds great, right? Like let me help you kind of get to where you need to get to." And then as you're getting that feedback, then how do you double down and reinvest to scale it in a meaningful way? And so, I think our academic pedagogies to date have always been around learn, right? And then, absorb it and then apply it. And what we're saying is we're moving into a world where you gotta, so you can't be clarify and then act. It's got to be act to get your clarity.
Hmm.
We got to turn it upside down,
I love
which is
that.
very much ironically a very entrepreneurial way of thinking. Really good entrepreneurs, that's what they do naturally anyways. They don't wait, they start acting, and then they read the signals and saying like, all right, that's not working, this is working, that's not working, people like this, and then they double down on the things that are working. And it's that velocity of experimentation then ultimately that differentiates them.
Yep. And we were talking a little bit about the pitch, but in terms of building, many founders feel trapped between building what's profitable and building what feels purposeful. So, how would you suggest they evaluate whether or not they're solving problems that truly align with their values and long-term vision versus something that's a prince cash?
Yeah, and look, there are plenty of great businesses that you can create that may not feel purposeful, and you just need to understand if that's what you're building. And I think there's also a number of things that feel purposeful that aren't great businesses. Um, but I think we've kind of segmented the world into those two camps. I think the majority of businesses that you can build, especially in today's day and age, can be profitable and be purposeful, right? You just have to align the two together. That doesn't mean every business is going to solve every inefficiency in the market, and we need other ways to do that. But at the same time, I think we over-index on this notion that if I'm making money, I can't be doing good, and if I'm doing good, I'm not allowed to make money. And I actually think that's a fundamental language problem that we
Mm.
have in our society right now. Because as soon as someone's doing something that's profitable, yet is having positive impact on people, they can sometimes get demonized for that. And sometimes if you're doing something profitable, people will say like it can't be, it can't be doing good. And neither is completely true. And so I think that again, this comes back to, and Colin, we were talking about it earlier, really about creating alignment, right? You should be able to show how your business model or the products you build, um, not by doing something different, but by selling the product or service that you're providing, the impact you're able to have on folks, while also being able to, create cash and build a profitable business. And I think this is a little bit of a failure of imagination. As we've kind of, we've got a very robust not-for-profit industry, obviously, in the US. Um, but we also, in some ways, have just assumed that they're the only ones that can be solving problems of societal value. And I just don't think that's the case. And in fact, I'll go even further. I think the idea of mission-driven capitalism is important because to really scale to the size of some of these problems, it's hard to do it as a not-for-profit. Um, whereas if you're able to, align profit, mission-driven capitalism the right way, the more you sell, the more profit you make, the more you can solve the problem, right? Like it becomes a loop to allow you to scale. And that's I think at the crux of some of the language that's out there. We've got plenty of companies that are now doing that. And we just need more examples of it and celebrate that.
Hmm. You've worked across venture capital, entrepreneurship, public policy, and education. So how do you see the relationship between mission-driven companies and long-term business performance evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I look, I just think mission-driven companies will, over the long term, outperform. And I say that just because the quality of talent that you're going to start to be able to accrue, it starts with that. To me, so much of this is about talent, and talent will want to sustain itself over an extended period of time in businesses where they feel like they can not only make money but also have meaning. And so I just think those two coming together become a really powerful talent magnet, any industry. You add the kind of culture you're able to create around that as well, and it becomes really a large differentiator. And so I see those going hand in hand as we move forward. And I see it going hand in hand primarily though because of where we think talent is residing today and wanting to do more of this.
Mm. And retail investors sure like to punish companies that aren't doing good for the world. Um, so for small business owners, I know we're talking about larger orgs and startups, but it can feel difficult to prioritize mission when, survival, payroll, cash flow, or immediate concerns. So what advice would you give entrepreneurs trying to build sustainable businesses without losing sight of the larger impact they're trying to create?
Yeah, I mean, I keep coming back to, Colin, a lot of these questions are just assume that mission and money have to be orthogonal, and have to be a trade-off. And I think that's the lack of imagination I think we have created in the language we use is that, it doesn't need to be that way. You can have mission and profit coexist. And that's what we try to do in the book is highlight folks that have made those decisions and have managed their career that way. And, again, trying to move away from, and look, a lot of it is because if you think about now this is always dangerous, but, thinking about this real time, but, you think about the fact that we have a for-profit sector and a not-for-profit sector, right? It feels like there's a binary choice. The not-for-profit sector, when defined, is about doing good work. The for-profit sector, when we call it, it's about maximizing profit. And so we imply that by maximizing profit, you can't be doing good work.
Mm,
Um, and I just that's again the falsehood that at least I'm trying to kind of surface is that there is something that sits across those that is for profit, but it also has the social benefit that one can see. And look, I think there's sectors where it's intrinsic, like healthcare, um, bioeducation, but I think there's plenty of other industries as well as we're seeing now with national security, and what's going on in that space, manufacturing, supply chain, so there's so many of these things that, when we talk about mission, it's much more broad than just even the sector. It could also be about job creation. We have
mm,
stories in the book about the mission for the company and the entrepreneur was just creating jobs in rural areas that otherwise wouldn't have these jobs, right? Like bringing IT jobs to Southwest Virginia, in a way that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Like that creates a mission within the company, even though the service they're providing may feel like a traditional, like managed security services service to the government. The how you do it could also be very mission driven.
mm.
And so, I think there's different ways to tackle this, but I think it creates a unifying moment whereby, for an entrepreneur and its organization, it galvanizes the team when you hit those rough spots.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. We're almost at time for your live Q&A. So drop those questions for Arun into the Q&A box. Arun, this has been so great, and I agree with you on so many levels on everything that's in this book. If you were going to wrap up a key takeaway, a golden nugget, of one thing that you want people to take from the book, what would it be?
Look, we talk about stability being the new risk, and I think we're wired biologically to seek security and stability over happiness. There's studies that show that. And so when we have decisions to make, many times we go like, well, what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if it goes wrong? And that's what 90% of us spend our time thinking about. I don't think we spend enough time thinking about like, but what if it goes right? Um, and I say that because the what if it goes right is where you can create real transformational breakthroughs. It's where you can really raise your ambition. It's where you raise the ceiling, and that would be, the thing that I would lay out there. The one other nugget I would challenge the audience to really think about, as well as what we talked about, which is I think careers will be based on problems that you care about.
Mm.
And so, a good test of that, right, is, if you go to a cocktail party, what do people ask you? Right? People ask you, what do you do? Um, and you know what? They don't really care what you do. It's really a proxy question about like, are you important? You know, how much money do you have, or what prestige do what influence do you have? That's really what they want to ask, but they can't ask that. So they say, what do you do? And it's not really that interesting of a question because then we spend all this time exaggerating what we do, and we find ourselves in that loop. A more interesting question would be asking people if the norm became asking people like, what problem do you care about? Like, what do you care about? It's great to meet you, Colin. Like, what problem do you care about? And like that would be interesting. Like I'd actually learn a lot more about you.
Mm.
I learn about you, not about the veneer that you're creating around you. And I think that would lead into, frankly, I think when you start talking about like what do you do, we find ourselves in almost scarcity conversations of like I'm competing with you. Uh,
Mm.
we're asked when if we ask like, what do you care about? What problem do you care about? I almost think it's a little bit more of an abundance conversation because your problem can be different than my problem, and that's all good. There's no comparative dynamic there.
Mm.
There's no judgment to it. So I think, to be brief though with your question, I mean, the two things I would say is when posed an opportunity, don't only ask what goes wrong, what happens if it goes wrong, ask what could happen if it goes right.
Mm,
Second is if you're at a cocktail party, start asking people, what problem do you care about?
I love that one. I'm gonna take it. All right, well, we got some live questions. So, Arun, let's see. For solo entrepreneurs who are trying to secure their first hires, are there any recommendations to make our offers stand out and attract strong talent?
Yeah, if it's your first hires, to me, it's all about a relational sell. It's about trust. Don't underestimate the importance of you as the entrepreneur. And what that means is like invest the time to get to know the person. Go to dinner with them. Don't just meet them in the office. Get to know if they're married, take their partner out with them as well.
Mhm.
Because many times in these early decisions, it's not even the person that's making the decision, it's the partner as well, because it's a joint decision.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that early on and having them understand that you care about that. And because those early hires, as much as it is about compensation, it really is more about like, do I believe in you? Do I believe that this is someone I want to work with and that when things get tough, we'll be able to figure it out?
Yeah. I can't remember who it was, but it was like I judge a person's character by how they treat their secretary. So if they're mean to their wife, you probably don't want to work with them.
Yeah.
Or a partner, that is. Oh, this is a fun one. How did your personal definition of success change from your early career to today?
Absolutely. Look, I think, when I came out, I was very much on that first vector of finance, if I had to say it, right? It was very much around that, and it was very much around kind of the instant. It's exactly what I'm saying now, right? What institution that I working for, and what kind of job did I have?
Yeah.
And I think both through my own personal experiences, but also now having had 30 years of business school reunions and friends and things of that sort. So you have a long, like, longitudinal and, cohort level of experience. I find the people that are the happiest, that feel the most fulfilled, have those broader sense of capitals, right? And I see it now, when we're with friends and, cocktail events and things of that sort. And, you can see the conversations, the ones that drift towards just financial stuff, and those just don't seem interesting. Um,
Mhm.
and in many cases, they feel hollow, and I feel almost I've gone from feeling like I want to be that to, I feel sorry for it. And in meaning that, like, I think we're all looking for more. We just, we end up talking about the things that we feel safest with. But I think, at the core, everyone's looking for, the capitals that we kind of laid out. And I think that's why, the message has been resonating. And look, I mean, I think if you look at even religious scriptures across different religions and philosophies, et cetera, I mean, there's some form of these all captured in it. And, I think that's just a very human dynamic. And I think, in the world we're in right now, we're surfacing some of that more acutely, and that's why we wrote the book.
Yep, that's all at the core of your new hot off the press book. I just saw some people in the chat said there's this showing up tomorrow. So that's a speedy delivery. But so everyone check out the Mission Generation. Haroon, it's so great to have you back on our stage. Congratulations on the new book. I back it 1000%. Everyone check it out. And Haroon, good luck on the book tour. Good luck on your impact journey. And for everyone in attendance, thank you so much. We got a bunch coming up. So
Thank you,
sign up
Colin.
for our upcoming events. But yeah, check out Mission Generation. Arun, thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin, for having me. And thank you to your team at Nasdaq. You guys have always been great supporters, and look forward to seeing the great things a lot of your entrepreneurs end up doing.
Amazing. We'll keep a lookout because they are part of the Mission Generation. So thank you so much, Arun.
All right. Take
All
care.
right, for those of you still on, check out the links in the chat. We've got upcoming webinars, we've got programs, resources, and all of the things to help your next stage of your journey. Thanks for joining us today. We will look forward to welcoming you all back online soon. Thanks again, everybody.
Take care.